I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network.
I've got Drew Curtis, founder of Fark.com, on the show. Drew, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Drew, let's just get through the basics because I feel like two things. One is Fark.com is like one of the oldest running internet businesses that I know of. And the other thing is there's the obvious thing I think of when you say Fark.com. So there's actually a couple, now that I've actually said it out loud instead of just read it, there's a couple of things I think about. So first off, how long has Fark.com been around and what is it?
Yeah, I started it back in February of 1999. So that's 15 years and counting so far.
So you totally went through the peak of the internet bubble, survived it, and are still running strong.
Yeah, although at the time when I started in 99, I actually hadn't considered making a business out of it. It was just something that I thought would be fun to do. And I also took a real sort of narrow view of what was going on in the late 90s. I didn't figure that was going to keep going, so I wasn't really motivated by what was happening then. But then, of course, the crash hit, and it went exactly the opposite direction. But yeah, I wrote out 2 recessions now, I think, and just still cranking along, yeah.
That's good. So Fark.com is basically you take news items that are submitted by your contributor base, and you essentially they're ridiculous news because all of the news is ridiculous, and we've covered that many times actually on this podcast. And you make funnier headlines or probably more accurate headlines, and people who want to see the real news go to Fark.com.
Yeah, and that's sort of something that happened by accident. That's changed. We were just doing initially just weird stuff, but then when 9/11 happened, there wasn't anything funny in the news cycle for a good month. So we switched on the idea of trying to punch up just regular news stories instead, and just kind of stuck with that. What's kind of fascinating about all that is how few regular news stories there actually are that are worth reading. If there were enough that I could have a section on my site for them, I'd do it. There's not that many. So
well, the funny thing is, And this is what I actually never read news. It's almost, I used to be like a news addict. I would read everything. Like I had 4 newspapers delivered to my doorstep. I'd surf the web all day for news because I was like an investor and a day trader. So I actually thought the news was relevant to my job, but it totally wasn't. Like news will never make you a better informed human being. It will only ruin your life. So all of that time I used to use to read news, I now use to like read a good book or watch something funny or do something more productive with my life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. I mean, if I wasn't doing this as my job, I probably wouldn't be doing this stuff either. And it seems like to me, it's like for years people have been asking me if I thought things were getting worse on the news. And for years I've been telling people no. But, boy, these last couple of years, though, it's really starting to go downhill fast. I mean, it's basically it's professional trolling is all it's turned into. It's not particularly exciting or interesting or useful.
Well, I think it's totally gotten worse. I mean, a few years ago, I was backstage for a news show. I had been on this news. I used to go on CNBC quite a bit. So they finally said, hey, why don't you just see how we do things out here in the back? And I remember one time the producer comes up to me and he says, I got to tell you the truth. We're really just trying to fill up the space between advertisements. So whatever we can do to do that, it's good for the news.
Yeah, there you go. Well, that's the problem is like I've noticed the news cycle slows down considerably when journalists are on vacation, which if there really was a news cycle, that wouldn't happen if you think about it.
Right. Well, and then you see things like, it's what I call outrage porn. So like somebody will say something and the news will kind of like almost like maggots converge on it and make it a news cycle for a day or two, ruin someone's life or career, and then move on to the next outrage porn.
Yeah, and the Twitter has made their job a lot easier there, too, because all they have to do is just say, hey, look what so-and-so said on Twitter today. I mean, that's got to be the laziest form of journalism ever. To me, I think what they've kind of lost their way on is they forgot that they were supposed to tell us why things were important. And so they spend all their time chasing types of articles that drive clicks, like, top 10 sandwiches, top 5 things that might kill you in your basement. And the problem with that is that they forgot that their job is actually to make what's going on in Afghanistan relevant. And they've just completely given up on that. In my opinion, they're doing everybody a great disservice.
Well, let's just play this out. Like, let's say you were a news editor. How would you make what's going on in Afghanistan relevant? I'm not saying it can happen or it can't. I'm just curious how you would do it.
Right. Well, see, and therein lies the problem, right? It's really, really hard, and that's why nobody's doing it. I'm not saying that that's even possible. I think the reason that they've completely given up is because coming up with a way to make Afghanistan relevant like Cronkite did the Vietnam War is damn near impossible, but is exactly what they need to be doing. I have no idea how to do it. But I think the other problem they got is that it isn't – a lot of people have this idea that, media is misleading us or somehow wanting us to concentrate on this stuff. And in actuality, no, they would rather not be talking about the garbage articles either. It's just that's what everybody clicks on. They're kind of stuck with it.
And yet everybody, if you're a reporter for the New York Times, you think you're like hot stuff just because you've got front page of the New York Times, but there's nothing there to read.
No, nope, not at all. I mean, the amount of filler I'm seeing too, I'm starting to wonder if sites like the Huffington Post and BuzzFeed have algorithms writing their articles these days, because I know they have articles that will write a story based off of like a box score to a baseball game. They can just print paragraphs of text out there. And I swear some of the articles I read, I'm like, that's got to be a computer writing this. Because you can't think of anything else it would be.
Well, I used to write for TheStreet.com. This is back like in 2004 or 2005. And I had very standardized articles. I would write 4 articles a day. And I would hire basically high school students to write the first draft of my articles just because they were so standardized. You could do that. And I think most news can probably be done that way. Yeah. Most news probably is done that way.
I think so, actually. Like I said, it's all the same when I go through all this stuff. I was taught when I was in school, you should have what you said you did, 4 different newspapers and you could read different sources. But I've discovered that, I'm reading like a couple hundred to 1,000 sources a day, and they're more or less identical all the way across the board. There's nothing really interesting to be gleaned from any of them.
So, taking it back a step, how is Fark doing as a business? Because now there's been the whole news industry and the whole online media and online news industry has changed so much. You must have been affected a little bit. What are the basic numbers like? How are you doing?
Yeah, well, surprisingly not bad. But it's interesting. It's like I don't usually go into the specifics on the financials because it's a number which is higher than anybody who reads the site would like to see and lower than any reasonable business person would expect. So I'm embarrassed on both sides, basically. But that said, a lot of what's been going on in the industry is really not related necessarily to a problem with advertising around news. It's an issue of the way that advertising is done online. And in particular, so one of the advantages of advertising online is that you can see results. You know exactly how many people saw it. You know where they were. You know what they clicked on. You know at what rate they clicked on. And so the narrative for, the past 15 years has been, well, advertising just doesn't work that well online. Well, I actually don't think that's true. I think it works as well as it did anywhere else. And I think that the real source of the problem is that you can't prove who saw an article in the newspaper, and you can't necessarily prove who saw one on TV unless you're tracking it with TiVo or something like that. But you can know on the internet, and I have a suspicion that advertising performs the same no matter where it is. And the real crisis is that advertising guys haven't figured out a way to lie effectively about how well ads work online.
I mean, like I used to be partners with a guy who was the CEO of a very big cable channel, like well-known cable channel. And he said to me, if he was running a business, the absolute last thing he would do is ever buy an ad on any kind of TV show or news show.
Absolutely.
Because he knew the crap he was selling.
Yeah, well, it also depends, too, because if you're doing advertising, if you're doing lead generation, so say you're selling, vacations in the Bahamas, well, you don't necessarily want to, shotgun blast that thing across network TV because you're really only trying to find people likely to go on vacation in the Bahamas in the next few months. And that kind of targeting is really hard to do with mass media. But if you're doing branding, on the other hand, that works perfectly for that kind of thing. But there's very few of us that have enough need to do branding in our own personal lives where that's even remotely relevant. But one of the interesting things that sort of come up is that over the years, the sort of the new things that have popped up in advertising are stuff that we've been doing since day one. It's sort of like this arms race, basically, where they'll make a change in the standard, people will figure out a way to hijack it, then they'll make a change in the standard again, and then people find a way to hijack that. And recently, one of the things they're going to is the concept of, I forget what this thing was called, it was like basically the advertisement must render on screen visibly for at least 1 second, which that seems kind of odd that wasn't standard before.
Wait, I don't understand. So the advertisers, say that again?
Yeah, so the ad must render on screen fully for at least a second. If longer is okay, but not less than 1 second. And
like the full screen or just like part of the screen?
No, because anywhere on the screen, the full ad has to render. So basically, it's like, it could be like just a part of the screen, but it has to stay visible for at least 1 second.
Huh.
And what's fascinating about this is that, that nobody was asking for this before, which kind of blows my mind. And the other thing is the reason why they want this is because this gets rid of click fraud issues where basically if you've got substandard traffic or you're faking, hits on an ad or whatever, this totally blows it out of the water because it's really hard to get them to stick around and stay for a second. Now, you could probably hire a botnet to do it anyway, but the upside is like, this change really helps me out because my audience is almost 100% organic, which is pretty much unheard of out there. Almost all the other websites get their traffic from Google and or Facebook. We get none from anybody.
Really? So Google's not linking to you on any of your stuff? Probably because you're just they're going to link to the Washington Post before they link to you because you're just repeating the Washington Post link.
Yeah, partly, although we're changing the headline, so there's an added relevance there. But the main problem is that the main page of our site was never designed for search engine optimization. So, it's just a bunch of words if you get right down to it. And I have no idea what would ever cause a hit from Google to come in and hit our page because it's just basically Google gets on our site and goes, I don't know what I'm looking at. Because aside from the fact that we've got multiple topics on there, we're also using humor and irony, which algorithms really have a hard time with. So it's been that way the entire time. It wasn't like we had traffic from them at one point and then stopped getting it. We never have. But that's been useful to me because, since our traffic is legitimate, engaged individuals, anytime they make a change to the advertising system, it usually favors us.
So starting from the bottom up, so basically you run your business out of your home. Do you have an office or are you just kind of you got this server and you're running Fark.com on it?
Yeah, basically that. We're a virtualized company, so there are 8 employees, and everybody works where they live, wherever that happens to be, and only 2 of us live in the same town. Everybody else is spread out wherever they are.
And what do the 8 employees do? I guess you go through links, you get thousands of submissions, and you go through links, and then probably there's someone who's calling sponsors and dealing with ads.
Yeah, actually, we gave up on that. The advertising industry has just become such a pain in the ass that I just quit, which sounds kind of bizarre considering you'd think that was where most of the money was coming from. But the deals would always give something like this. It'd be like, okay, so we'll give you $100,000 for X package. Okay, great. Then right before you sign it, they go, oh, the budget was cut in half. Can we still do it? And, okay, I guess. And then they'd usually come back and say, oh, the budget was cut again. And now we're, at a point where, we have these month-long dev cycles where all of a sudden they just slash me from something that was usable to something that's pretty much at cost and a lot of stress. And so finally I was just like, you know what, I don't want to run my people ragged chasing around stuff that's pretty much netting to zero for me. So I just kind of gave up and said, we'll just do low profile, we'll run Google stuff, and then I'll work on other alternate revenue sources. And I've been working on a couple which are kind of fun, but they're also fairly boring also, but they work.
And right now, how much traffic do you have?
So right now we're sitting at about 45 million page views a month.
45 million page views a month?
Yep, and it's about 3 million uniques, give or take. It depends. We tend to spike up in October and down in July, so, like everybody else. So it's sort of sizable, but, the problem is also like with the size that social media is getting these days, we are still sizable, but everybody else is getting much bigger than us, and so it's like, well, okay, fine.
So, and you're saying your traffic's organic, so people aren't linking to you from like Facebook or Twitter or anything like that?
Right. No, we get hardly any inbound traffic from anyone. Now, people occasionally do copy our links, and they mention that they found them on our site, and I really appreciate when they do that because that's about the only way anybody finds out about us. But other than that, it's been pretty organic, and it's the best kind of traffic to have. It's a very slow-growing traffic, but as far as all of the stuff, like I said, the advertising industry is trying to make adjustments to deal with fake and bad traffic, and we don't have either of those.
And when sites like BuzzFeed, I mean, there's like a million sites like BuzzFeed, UpWorthy, and so on. When sites like that came out, that didn't affect traffic to Fark.com?
No, and the reason why is because it's sort of the same deal that like network TV forgot about after DVRs showed up, which was there's not competing time slots anymore. Basically, if another site shows up that people like, as long as they don't like us less, they stick around. So normally when we lose people, it's because they got promoted. We've also discovered that normally when they come back, it's because they got promoted a second time. So basically the first promotion, they got really busy. And the second one, they had a lot of time to kill again.
What do you mean they got promoted? Because they submitted something and they got upvoted?
No, actually in their own personal lives. Like one of the weird things is like we are way out in space as far as like how online community design goes because there's no blueprint for what one looks like at 15 years old and nobody knows what happens next, including myself. But one of the things we've observed over the years is that, so I started this site when I was 26, recently married, no kids. Now I'm 41. I got 3 kids. You got one that's going to be in high school in a couple of years. And so I'm a very, very different person than I was then. And a lot of our initial readers are also. And what we discovered is that most people, if you had to say there was anything in common about people that read Fark on a daily basis, it was that they got a lot of spare time at work and they're bored. But it turns out that eventually these people get promoted, and when they do, now they don't have a lot of spare time at work and they have no time to screw around, so they go away. And if they get promoted, usually the main reason we get somebody back is because they got promoted a second or a third time into a position where they had spare time again.
So I love the headlines. I love how you like twist the headlines on your site. Do you write all the headlines? Or do you have people writing the headlines?
They are 80% user submitted, and of those, I'd say probably the bulk of those come from about, 10 people. But that's not on purpose. Basically, what I do is I go through what's been submitted every morning and just pick out the stuff that makes me laugh. And I got to say, what's been interesting is watching over the years and how the submission process changes. And so right now we are. I personally hate puns. So if somebody submits a pun headline, it's unlikely that I'm going to approve it. However, one of the other people that occasionally goes through the link likes them a little too much and is likely to put them through. But the other thing that I'm optimizing downward for is I'm really tired of these. You'll never believe what happened next. You couldn't see this coming. All that. Basically, the BuzzFeed UpWorthy.
That's the BuzzFeed trick.
Yeah, I hate those. So I'm trying to get away from those because I feel like everybody's getting really tired of them, and they weren't particularly good in the beginning. So they're designed to inspire curiosity, whereas I think yours are funny. Like yours are comedy. Yes, correct. And so that's what I call it. Like it's a contextual overlay for why you should care is comedy. That's essentially what the Daily Show does, as it turns out. Is, you know, that's one of the reasons why people get their news from the Daily Show, is because they give them to another context that they prefer, and that's where our readership comes in.
Well, I love like I'm gonna read one of your like you have this last one is teen who may need reconstructive surgery after participating in the viral stunt called the Fire Challenge says it's not a good idea. So stuff like that is funny because it's sort of a lot of the stuff you do. It seems like it's funny because it's sort of obvious. And what's funny is that news should almost be something that's unobvious, and that's why we want to read it because it's new.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. No, a lot of the times what we're doing is we'll go into an article deep, and like to me, some of the best ones are something where somebody plucked an observation out of like paragraph 6 that wasn't the lead of the story. And that's actually pretty close to that right there. I mean, it probably is still the actual article, but I like stuff like that. And the other humor that I think I prefer a lot is the stuff that's really close to offensive, but definitely isn't. It just sounds like it. And those are hard to do because, like, I can't give you any examples because most people don't laugh at them. But if you read the site long enough, you'll find one or two. It'll pop up.
So yeah. So like, what's funny to you? Like, what's comedy to you? Because clearly you're a comedic writer.
Yeah, sort of.
And by the way, just to mention, I've read your book. It's not news. It's Fark: How Mass Media Tries to Pass Off Crap as News, and it's a funny book. Like you're a funny writer.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, to me, it seems like the way to do it is that you sort of like, I'm a big fan of curveballs, and I tell people that like if I had to describe what my thought process is on anything, like I really think sideways. Like I don't tend to see the same things people do. I usually like I'm looking around the corner at like sort of like you're carving space around it, and so I've discovered that for the most part, it's like, you know, pulling something in that surprises people about it or giving a context to an article. Like when I do radio interviews, occasionally I'll go through top stories, but what I'll do when I do the top stories is I will then also pull sort of closely related incidents of things. So for example, like today we had a tortoise got out of, I think it was the LA Zoo. It was recaptured later on. And so there's like an entire like plethora of random animals getting out of zoos and what they did next that goes alongside that totally works for sidebar stuff. So that's kind of the way I try to work it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So like I'm looking at one, you know, Paul Ryan has now gone full Alex Jones. Never go full Alex Jones. Let me click on what the original link was.
Yeah, it looks like it was a raw story article.
Oh, I'm hearing music actually. Is that coming from your site? Oh no, it might be coming from the Mail Online.
All right, Mail, love it.
Now it was coming from the Mail Online. I think they had like an advertisement that was a play on load.
Yeah, those bug me. We don't allow those. Mainly because like if you're reading at work, and all of a sudden your computer goes off, with a weird ass song, you're going to be distracting everybody. Everybody's going to know you're screwing around.
Yeah, exactly. So I have to admit, like, if I were you, I probably would have sold the business by now. So you're probably making like a decent profit. A company like BuzzFeed would probably love to have 45 million extra views. Like, why don't you just sell the business and make a ton of money and move on to the next business?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because like I like what I'm doing. And it's a lot of fun. It also doesn't necessarily take up a full day's worth of time. It can. My wife used to give me crap because in the early days I was doing interviews, and people would say, how much time do you spend working on the site every day? And I would say, I don't know, like half an hour. And my wife got mad at me once when she overheard that. She's like, don't tell people that. And I'm like, why? Because you don't want people to know that that's how little I work? And she goes, no, you're missing the point. She says, just because you like it doesn't mean it's not work. And I was like, oh. Yeah, I worked on this thing 16 hours a day. So it's kind of nice and it's flexible and stuff like that. And I think but the issue I've got is more kind of like what would somebody do if they bought it? Like I did have a buyout offer on the table a couple of years ago from somebody that I had 100% confidence would have killed the site within about a year. And that didn't seem like a good idea. But if the right person came along, I might. And part of the reason why is because like we were massively under monetizing our advertising. Like I said, I kind of gave up on the direct ad stuff. But, if somebody else had access to that inventory, they could probably kill it. It's just one of those things where I'm like, I'm just giving up on it at this point. The advertisers are just too insane and crazy, and the ad buyers are not intended to do a good job, and the whole thing is just, a mess, and I'm not making any money on it. So I gave up on that completely. But, somebody else could probably monetize the heck out of it.
Well, what percentage of your revenues come from like Total Fark or your subscription sites?
Yeah, so like advertising is actually half of our revenue, as it turns out now. The other revenue is coming from Total Fark subscriptions, which people can pay $5 a month to see everything that's submitted. And I don't think anybody actually buys it for that. I could be wrong. Like, I do know that like tons of comedy writers for late night shows have accounts because they told me to basically, try to find the stuff that like just because we passed over it doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't funny. There could be something interesting there. And but the rest of them, I think, for the most part, it's people who just really like the site and want to help contribute and keep us going because it makes a huge difference. It means I don't have to spend my time. We can do stuff like not have audio on ads, not have takeovers, not have irritating stuff get in the way, so it kind of works. But a new product I'm working on, which is, hopefully I keep this interesting, but we discovered that like about 80% of the articles we link to are, and you can actually see it on the main site anytime you go there. About 80% of these articles exist somewhere else because, we sort of are floating on top of the news cycle. Whatever's out in the day is mostly somewhere else. And so what we're doing is that I first asked the community to make sure that this wouldn't piss them off, and they said go for it. Was basically we are signing up media partners, and basically what they do in the partner pool is that in the morning I still do the same thing I do. I go through, I read all my stuff, post all the stuff that I think is funny, bounce out, show up a couple hours after that for the rest of the day. What's happening now, though, is I've got a second person who I've got hired who basically then, after I put all the stuff up on the site, goes through what I have approved and then tries to locate those articles that are not on partner sites and try to locate those exact articles on the partner sites and then switches the URL, but not the tagline. So the idea is basically if you happen to have a copy of the article we linked to, we'll get it to you instead. And my community doesn't care at all, and there's enough media guys out there that find this interesting that it's getting some traction. So I'm hoping that, if that continues to go the way it has been, I might be able to even get rid of the basic ads too by the end of the year. I'm really hopeful.
So because you mentioned a lot of at least your initial traffic or your largest customers were coming from actual news sources because they were using you as their news source, like CNN and Fox News.
Yep, exactly. So it turns out that like the percentage of people, it's not only news people because they're also trying to find what to write about, but also comedians and interestingly musicians, people who have a lot of time to kill that are sort of want to see what's going on and relevant and be sort of paying attention at least to what's in the zeitgeist. But I'd say probably between comedy writers and actual news media, that's where our two biggest sources are. And we see something interesting too in traffic patterns. I was doing a test run where I got one of our target sites let us have access to their analytics, and so I started, basically seeing like what does the traffic look like when it comes inbound? Because part of the problem we had is that we noticed that like we track outbound traffic, and so if we drive 20,000 clicks to a link, it turns out that the receiving site only gets about 18,500 of those, and I was trying to figure out what the deal was with that, and I did figure it out. It turns out that analytics, a lot of people are double clicking the articles, and so it's launching two copies of it, and analytics just throws out one of them. That makes sense.
I see.
But what else was interesting was to see the traffic pattern. Like we'll link to an article. Here comes about 5,000 hits an hour. If it's really good for about 4 hours is what you'll see. But then you'll see right behind it, here comes Reddit, here comes Twitter, here comes Facebook, and then CNN and Huffington Post and Fox and all those guys right behind it. So it's interesting that like for every one outbound click we generate, there's an extra 10 that'll come in from other sources that found it on our site. And I know this because we tagged the link, so I can prove it.
And you've never thought about doing the Reddit model at the top level? Like I think in your Total Fark, you sort of do the Reddit thing a little bit, but you never thought about doing the Reddit model on the front page? No,
and there was actually a couple of reasons for this. The first reason is that we tried voting a little while and found out something interesting because our atomic unit of community is comedy instead of what's relevant. So like Reddit is what's relevant supposedly, although that's a lot of cats. I like cats; they're pretty relevant. But it turns out when you ask people to vote for comedy, there's broad disagreement as to what's actually funny, and you pretty much end up with puns, which is interesting because I think it's a very cultural thing. Like our audience is mostly North American, and it's just like some people don't get British humor. A lot of Brits don't get American humor. And so after England, which is less than 5% of our readership, there's nobody. It's North America, and that's it. And because of this cultural, broad disagreement on what's actually funny, the voting method doesn't work on our site. The second problem is that I take sort of a dim view of it anyways, because I'm one of these, I don't believe that there's wisdom in crowds. I think that you could probably, like, if there's 1,000 people out there, the aggregate knowledge that they all have is very high. But I bet 999 of them are really useless. And there's like that one guy in there who you really want to talk to. And so my thing is more kind of like, let's sort of put an editorial piece on top of it and not let people decide sort of in bulk what's funny. And I'll just put up the stuff instead. And as a result, it's probably capped off our top level audience. I mean, because like Reddit's got, like 40 million unique, something like that. I don't think there's 40 million people in the world that care that much about comedy news. So, but it's something that I just prefer to do. It's how I.
But here's the thing: you're still linking to the actual real news. So like you're not making up. It's not like The Onion where you're making up news. So you're actually still quote unquote keeping people informed. You're just sort of deciding what's funny to you in the news cycle, in today's news cycle.
Yep, great. Although it turns out, like I said, it rarely has much to do with the actual article, and it has everything to do with the person who submits the link, whether or not they had an interesting look on it, or whether or not I can figure one out.
So I have a couple questions about this. Like I always tell people don't read the news because there's absolutely nothing useful in it. There's like, for instance, let's say an article comes about the Ukraine. There's nothing I can do. B, there's nothing really that's interesting to me. And C, within 6 months, nobody will even know the Ukraine ever existed again. So, but I'll say this, and people will say, oh, you got to watch out. There's a new Hitler on the rise, or, you got to watch out. You got to be informed so you know what's going on in your world. What is the deal with that? Like, do people have to be informed? I don't know the answer. My opinion is no. That informed means reading good books and being intelligent. But what do you think the answer is?
I actually agree. I think that's it. In fact, like one of the sites like that I tend to get more real news than anything else is it's not actually a news site. It's Stratfor. You guys?
Yeah. Stratfor is another big one where they're constantly wrong about everything. But they have all this interesting data about the Ukraine and about Malaysia and about, I don't know, secret records or whatever.
Yeah, they have a lot of backing information is what I like about it. It isn't, because the problem with what's going on in current events is that nobody really knows what the heck is going on. And they don't tend to piece this stuff together until much later. Like, for example, if a plane goes down, I mean, it's going to be like 2 days before anybody knows what's going on. And we've done things where occasionally there's major media events that'll occur and we'll do real-time tracking of it. And you'll come to find out if you roll back through that, how much of that stuff was just completely wrong. A great example of that is we've got our 9/11 thread in the archive. We had that up 5 minutes after the first plane hit, and it's a live record of all of the stuff the media got wrong. And the worst one that drove me absolutely crazy was the Boston Marathon bombing. I mean, you could have just turned the TV off for a week and then finally caught up on it later. It would have been a better use of your time, too.
Right, because it's not as if you're going to do anything. So the Boston Marathon bombing was horrible, but everyone who sat there and watched 12 straight hours of news about it, it's not like it changed their lives for the better or they were able to do anything about it or make the situation better. Like there's no reason to do that as opposed to do something like take a jog or do something that's going to improve your life.
Yeah, because I mean, like I said, they don't have the information initially anyway. They don't know. It's all rumor. It's so in 90% or 100% even in some cases of initial reports on stuff that's breaking end up being incorrect. And I actually told people, like, I can't remember what it is, the Boston Marathon bombing in particular. They hadn't caught the guys that did it. Everybody's freaking out, and I was like, you know what, everybody, just turn off the TV and come back in a week. They'll have it all if you want to know what's going on. But I'll tell you what, they won't have is any useful information tonight, maybe tomorrow at the soonest.
Yeah, and even then, what are you going to do with the useful information? Like, are you going to border up your house because your house is going to get bombed?
Yep, I would tell people that the way you should do news is the way I do movies. I don't go see movies unless about 100 people tell me it's awesome. And the reason why you can not pay attention to the news is because if there's anything you really need to know about, people will tell you. So it'll be really hard to miss. So you can go a long, long time without having to read a newspaper.
That's a really good point because, for instance, people always ask me, oh, if you don't read the news, how come you always seem to know what's going on? Like,
people tell you.
It's because people tell me that, oh, did you see what happened? A Malaysian airline went down. Or, also all the headlines are everywhere. So you only need to see the headline and you could write the whole article yourself.
So
yep,
pretty much. Yep.
I even think like a lot of good writers start off as journalists, but eventually, as soon as they possibly can, they quit and try to write books and meaningful things. So,
Yeah.
But it's interesting though. There are so many news sites that survive on like BuzzFeed, UpWorthy, Drudge, even Fark.com. You guys survive on the fact that people are obsessed with news. Although to give you credit, you're playing it with more irony that this is not really news. It's not news. It's Fark is your slogan.
Yeah, we're kind of admitting that the jig is up. That basically this stuff isn't news, but come check it out. And the other thing too is because we don't have a lot of tricks that drive traffic anywhere, because the traffic more or less doesn't matter to me for outbound stuff. We don't have articles on the site, so we don't need to trick people to click on stuff to find out what the actual answer is. So it's more just kind of here's sort of a daily, list of what's probably going on. Click on all of it or none of it, because it doesn't make any difference as far as we're concerned.
Well, and the other thing is, let's say somebody wants to talk to me about the Federal Reserve or about some stock. None of that actually. So you would think that actually might help me a little bit more, for instance, if I was an investor. But it turns out it's almost the exact opposite of what you would think will actually help you. So
yeah.
All this people complaining about the Federal Reserve printing money, it doesn't matter to me what your political beliefs are. It's still not going to help me investing one way or the other. That's never worked.
Yeah, exactly. I have noticed something interesting, though. I have had a bit of luck investing on media signals, and it isn't what people think. If somebody tells me they need to watch CNBC all day long, I tell them, you're crazy. That's just going to mess your brain up. But sometimes you can learn something from it. And in particular, ask yourself the question, why is this in the news cycle? Because for the most part, a lot of stuff that ends up getting put in the news cycle is actually strung out by other people that had other motivations. It happens a lot in business news in particular. So you have to ask yourself what's going on. And in particular, one of my favorite examples was, it was a few years ago, Henry Blodgett, who does Business Insider, wrote an article, and it basically was, he just posted Bank of America's financials and said, can anybody explain to me how these guys are not bankrupt? That was the article. I didn't see the original article because at that point, it was even if I had, I probably would have not remembered it. But the following day, I was traveling to New York City, and so I'm in, a couple airports sitting around killing time. And in the morning, I see the president of Bank of America on CNBC talking about how Henry Blodgett's a jerk. But that was literally what he was talking about. And so I was like, okay, fine. I mean, I've never met Henry Blodgett. Maybe he's a jerk. I have no idea. But I thought, it's just
actually, I just have to say, he's actually an extremely good guy. But go ahead.
Good, excellent. Yeah, I don't know. He's a Fark reader too. He used to submit, when he was getting Business Insider going, he would submit the articles from his own account. So,
It's funny.
But at any rate, during the afternoon, though, I'm riding an elevator somewhere, and it's another business channel. I think it was I don't think it was Fox Business at the time, but a different business channel. There's the CEO of Bank of America again, and he's up there saying Henry Blodgett's a jerk. And at this point, I'm like, okay, so this guy's doing a media tour. What's the deal? And that's when I went and found the actual article. And so look at what this means. So the day before, Blodgett says, I think Bank of America is bankrupt. The following day, for whatever reason, the CEO, president, whoever he was, took time out of his busy schedule to spend an entire day running around Midtown Manhattan, giving interviews to anybody who would listen, the point of which was Henry Blodgett's a jerk. And I look at that and I go, put all these together, Henry Blodgett's nailed it. That's what this means. This guy's in a huge panic and he's running around because Henry Blodgett basically just took him to task. And so based on that, I decided, okay, I'm going to short Bank of America. Here's the problem. It didn't work out for me because then 2 days later, that's when Buffett bought in. So I got killed. But, that's example how it doesn't work. But every once in a while, ask yourself the question, what is the point of this? How did this get in the news in the first place?
Well, a lot of people also do that so-called phenomenon of news jacking. So some news will come out and then you do some article or some piece of news that piggybacks that other news so you get popular.
Correct. Yeah. There's also ones too. It's I see a lot with articles about breastfeeding moms getting booted off of planes. Or there was one recently where there was a guy who basically, there was an article about how DC Comics was being really mean and not letting a guy use the Superman logo for the grave of a 5-year-old who was murdered somehow. And so you read that article, and clearly the point of that article is, DC Comics is bad. They're such jerks. They should let him do it. Well, it turns out a friend of mine works there. So I called her up and I asked, I was like, what's going on here? And she said, yeah, so here's the problem is that guy isn't related to the family of the child. And we had conversations with him, and we don't believe that he is being truthful about his motivations. And so that's why we did it. And what's interesting is that the point that this ended up in the news at all backs up that claim, because how did the media find out about that? DC Comics didn't call him. So who did? Well, obviously the other guy did. And then that begs the question, why did he do it? Well, to apply pressure. For what? Well, if he was just honest about it, maybe it kind of would have worked out. But it turns out that this guy who wanted the thing, like, not related to the family of the child at all, and the child died 5 years ago. None of it makes any sense. But, of course, when they call DC for an official comment, they have to say, well, we can't comment on this. We're looking at it. So you just get the other guy's side of the story.
So what was his reason for writing that?
Well, I don't know, but and I didn't get a chance to ask my friend what she thought it was either. But a lot of that doesn't make sense. I mean, kid died 5 years ago. He says he felt inspired. He isn't related to the family, and then somehow obviously called the media out to do a hit piece on DC for some reason. So whatever's going on there is not up and up what he said it was. But I don't know.
So there's two things going on. One is, not only will you waste time watching the news and you'll be no more informed than anybody else, but the news actually could be, manipulated and lying to you. So it makes it even worse to actually just get the paper and open it up and read the headlines.
Yeah, that's pretty much it exactly. Like I said, you're better off just waiting for people to tell you what's going on, because they'll save you a bunch of time.
I'll tell you when the news has helped me with investing. So, and you bring this up a little bit in your book, but there every couple of years there's a new type of flu scare. So you had avian flu, which went nowhere, and then you had swine flu, which went nowhere. And I don't know how they name these things. I don't know why it goes viral, so to speak. But swine flu, as far as I know, one person died from it or whatever. Like the normal number of people who die from the flu died from swine flu. But what happened was every stock that has anything to do with pork crashed like 20 or 30%. And so then it was actually useful to go, and I actually did a video about it. It actually was useful to go out and buy all of these pork-related stocks, because the pigs had nothing to do with this flu in the first case. It was just named swine flu.
Yeah, exactly. Or like another good example of what I've seen recently is that I've been buying into the cognitive behavioral thing where when Apple did their stock split, they put it at $88 for a very good reason. So it'd go to 100. And that seems kind of dumb, but what's been interesting is watching the media narrative surrounding Apple. So pre-split, it's Tim Cook's got no new ideas. They're floundering. They aren't growing anymore. This is a value stock, not a growth stock, whatever. Post-split, it's all of a sudden Tim Cook's a genius, and all of these new product lines they've got supposedly in the works are amazing. What the hell are they talking about? Nothing changed other than the number of the stock thing. But you see that coming around, and it's like that can really mess with investors' heads, because what are they supposed to believe there? My argument would be just ignore everybody and don't even bother.
So the other interesting thing in your business really is that it still shows that it's possible with a server in your living room. Essentially, I'm exaggerating a little bit. You can start a business and it could be successful and people can thrive. People always have this sense that, it's too late for me. It's too late for me to start a business. All the good internet businesses started when Google started, like in 1996. But I don't really think that's true. Like, I think you can continue to innovate. Like, there's probably plenty of, look, you're seeing all these sort of competitors to Fark.com pop up, and it hasn't affected your business at all.
Yeah, well, most of them aren't doing exactly what we're doing anyway. I mean, they're mostly going full news side. Like, it's very hard to structure it the way I did, mostly because, like, I'm optimized for my life, which sort of weirds people out. VCs in Silicon Valley look down their nose at it, and they call it a lifestyle business as if it's some kind of a bad term. But basically, I'm operating on the fact that I want to have fun. I want to make enough money to play with my kids, but I want to have enough time to play with my kids. And I do. And as a result, there are certain things that I could have done to juice the site up and probably made it much bigger than it is, but I just don't want to, which, again, like a lot of people have a problem with that, the fact that I might not want to make as much money as I possibly could, but I really don't. I mean, I'm doing fine.
So what's your plan? Like, what do you want to do for the next 20 years? Not that you have to know, but if you were to just guess right now.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I've got a couple of really weird ideas in the works. One thing I'm working on is I've been floating an idea around on a company that attacks and destroys patent trolls.
That destroys what?
Patent trolls. Guys that buy patents and sue people on them. So basically legalized extortion. I got hit by one a couple of years ago, so I had a crash course. Actually, that's how I got a my TED Talk was on that too, which went surprisingly farther than I thought. I thought I was just going to tell a story and be entertaining for 5 minutes, but it turned out I've heard from a lot of people that were in a similar situation.
Wait, what happened? So somebody said they had a patent on changing news headlines, or what did they say?
Oh, it was really dumb. So what they had a patent on was you go to a website, you put in a bunch of data into a bunch of forms. I mean, this is literally what the patent said. Then it would take that data you put into the forms, it would compose that into an email. There was a news release, and it would email it to people. But what was funny about it is that I busted them on this thing because it turns out that in journalism vernacular, news release means press release, which I find kind of funny. But basically, it was for sending press releases out and via email. Basically, I got hit by a lawsuit by a guy who was basically hoping I would just pay up and roll over. But it just made me personally angry, so I decided to just fight him into the ground. And it turns out that I accidentally found out that that's the only known strategy that works. It's very scary, but it's the same thing like when when you have a bully that's harassing you and shaking you down for money. I mean, you need to just pay him every time, and you can fight him. And I fought, and I ended up winning.
So you fought in court. Did you meet him in court, or was it like sort of?
Court. What happened was that I made it so terrible and annoying and so dangerous to them because basically these guys are attorneys, so they're very risk-averse people. And I basically kept on saying, "Look, man, I hope you stay in this lawsuit as long as possible because I'm going to come after you personally and decimate you." And I think he stopped liking hearing that once I pointed out that the patent that he had sued us on, we didn't infringe on. So the guy basically said, "All right, fine then." He's like, I'll give you one last settlement. What will you go for?" And my attorneys advised to cough him something. But I said nothing. And the guy said, okay, which was unfortunate because I was torn between a $0 settlement or him paying all my attorney's fees, which were substantial at that point. And because he settled right at
how much
zero
did you pay for attorneys?
Yeah, so what's that?
How much did you pay overall for attorneys?
Oh, I ran into six figures. I mean, but I got off lucky because it turns out like the data on it suggests that if your average patent successful defense costs about $2.5 million.
Oh my gosh.
But I got out early because basically I just said, look, I'm going to scourge you. And the guy's like, okay, well, let me jump. The reason I ended up deciding to bounce was because he made a very critical error. All these settlements that the patent trolls have you sign have non-disclosure agreements in there, and mine did too, but I struck it, and he signed it. So I was like, well, this is a huge opportunity. Now I can just basically flay this guy in the media anytime I want to. So I've been doing it for 3 years, and it's been fun.
Well, okay, what's his name?
There were two inventors of it. I never found out whether or not the guys that did the Gooseberry Natural Resources was the shell company name. And if you punch in Gooseberry Natural Resources, you will find those guys in the name of it. It turns out that there were two people on the patent that created it. One of whom's last name is Elizabeth Spears, I think, or something like that. I'd have to look all this up because it's not in front of me. But here's the thing was that somebody early on contacted the inventors who filed the patent and asked them if they were involved in this lawsuit because you couldn't tell us. We were getting sued by a shell company with an attorney. The inventors said, no, we sold that a long time ago, and I should have been smarter and asked a follow-up question, which I didn't. But later on, I got an email from a guy named Kevin O'Connor who he got sued by the same. He called me up and he said, I got sued by the same trolls. And I was like, do you mean the same patent, the same company, or the same people? Because we never found out who the people were. And he goes, it's the same people. Not the same company, not the same patent. And I was like, well, how do you know? And they said, well, it's the same people that invented your patent. I said, well, yeah, but they said they sold it. He goes, yeah, well, I talked to them. I asked them the same question. I said, are you guys financially benefiting from this patent? And they said, well, we sold it a long time ago. He said, but I asked a yes or no question. When I pressed them, they hung up.
Huh.
And I'm like, oh, well, then there you go. That's the answer. They were behind it.
It's a scary world out there. Like when you put yourself out there and you're making money, people come after you.
Yeah, basically, they made a huge mistake in my case because what they should have been doing was just going after people that, like, the big dogs that just write checks to the extortionists and to get them to go away. Turns out, what the research shows that if you write a lot of settlement checks to patent trolls, you'll get more lawsuits. So if you do like what my friend Lee Cheng did over at Newegg, where he started in 2005 or 2006 on a different strategy where he just fought everybody into the dirt. He actually has no new active cases in the last 2 or 3 years or something like that because people are just afraid to sue him anymore. And it's a great strategy. It totally works. And if more people did it, the whole problem would be solved.
Well, so again, now, so how would you fight the patent trolls? Like, how would you make a site fighting patent trolls?
Oh, so here's an interesting thing. It's a combination, and I now know this is legal. By the way, it's not that it's illegal or criminal, but I know that it's legal because somebody else is actually doing it to somebody else. There are about 20 publicly traded patent trolls out there, more or less. Some of them are pure trolls. Some of them are hybrids. And by hybrid, I mean they at one point had an active product line, but now they're making the majority of their money off of litigating on patents that they got years ago. And a lot of stage 4, stage 5 companies head this way. And of those companies that do this, the ones that are successful say that they do it based on like throughput. They basically file a couple hundred lawsuits, they get a couple hundred settlements. But I started analyzing them, and it looks like to me that most of them are actually only making revenue off of about like somewhere between 4 and 8 total patents in their entire portfolio. And if you can locate what patents those patents are, anybody can file a request at the United States Patent Office to re-examine these patents. And if you can get these guys to blow up, you can also be shorting them when this happens. So it's kind of fun. And there's actually a guy doing it right now to a company called Parker Vision. He only recently started doing this, but Parker Vision's been taking a pounding anyway. So I don't know if they're.
Is that because when the patent office opens up a re-examination, the stock falls?
Yeah, and the reason why is this, because if they so basically you file for a re-exam, the patent office says, are we going to take this or not? Well, if they don't take it, then that means that they generally agree with it. So it means that if they do take the re-exam, there's a high probability they saw a reason that they were going to need to change the patent.
And so any shareholder knows that A, Parker Vision or whoever is making a significant amount of money on this patent, and B, if the patent office decides against them, then that money goes away.
Correct. And so there's a guy actually doing this to Parker Vision right now. He's hated them for years, but he recently filed he says there are 4 patents over there, and they're all crap, and he's filed re-exams on all of them at the USPTO, and if they get vaporized, Parker Vision goes to zero. He's
okay,
right.
So what are some other companies that are patent trolls that you think could be, some patents could be open for re-examination?
Yeah, so it turns out there's a bunch of them out there. There's one, Bringo, which has been around for a while. These guys have a patent on. This is all what I can vaguely remember because I haven't.
I know Bringo very well, actually.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so they only got like 1 patent, but people have been trying to re-examine this thing, and it's been holding up. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on there.
You know what? I will tell you a story. Their patent will hold up because the guy who wrote it, Ken Lang, we were like grad school office mates. And so I was there when he wrote the patent, basically.
Wow, nice.
And I actually know the patent inside and out. That's the only one where it's actually good. And in fact, Mark Cuban even invested in the company because he thought it was good too.
I did see that too. It's definitely no doubt there. But yeah, that's one of those ones. If they got flipped over, they'd be dead. But see, that's the thing is like people have tried to re-examine that one, nothing's happened with it. So but that's an example of like very very low number of intellectual property units bringing in money.
But you're right though. When the patent office did start re-examining, or when stuff happened, the stock fell considerably. So it's a decent strategy.
Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, and even if it works, then it goes to zero. So you can probably make house money back initially and then just ride it out the rest of the way. Baronetics is another one, which is VHC. And there's another one actually that most people don't know that doesn't have that many intellectual property assets is Acacia. Everybody thinks that these guys have they have 3,000 patents or so, but they only seem to make money off of about 10 portfolios tops.
What's the symbol on that? Do you know?
ACTG.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that one.
Yeah, they kind of popped out of it was it's an alleged privateer for Microsoft going back about like 7 or 8 years or so.
Yeah, ACTG. Yep. And you're saying they have, and they only make money on like a few patents, but they have thousands of patents?
Yeah, they have thousands of them. They only make money off of them, and you can read like right in the liner notes. They'll tell you. They don't tell you which ones, but you can see basically they make the vast bulk of their money off of like this last quarter, 2 settlements. So, and I think it's the same patent too. It's just my guess, but
why don't you set up like a hedge fund? I bet you someone like Mark Cuban would invest in your hedge fund if you kind of identified all the weakest ones. This has $1 billion market cap.
I actually did talk to him about it. He said he just couldn't wrap his head around it right now, but he didn't say it was a terrible idea. He said, hit back later on. So, we've had conversations.
That's really funny. Okay, I like that idea. So you're basically kind of sitting around, coming up with new ideas. You have a good lifestyle. Yeah,
it's not too bad. It's like, between that and like, I also found that like, part of the reason I've been following these patent trolls is I got a MBA recently, which kind of surprises people because like I'm
Yeah,
41,
why'd you get an MBA? You have like the ultimate lifestyle. Why'd you ruin it by going to business school?
I thought it might be interesting, and it turns out it was. And I'll tell you, the first thing I found that absolutely fascinated me is that the professors hate the people that come out of the programs too, which means that they're not the ones causing it, which is fascinating. They basically admissions is letting these idiots in.
Wait, I don't understand. They who do the professors hate?
So the narrative on business school is that you take a normal person who doesn't know much about business, put them in business school, and they come out with their heads full of all kinds of garbage. Turns out that what's actually happening is that they're getting people showing up with all kinds of garbage in their head, and they just stay that way. And the professors hate those guys too. It drives them nuts. Like, I'll give you an example. I was like, one of the classes I took that I ran out of stuff to take towards the end of it because there's only 4 tracks. There's strategy, and you get a bunch of that, and you're kind of done with it. And then there's leadership, and I'm like, I don't care. Entrepreneurship, I checked out. It was Columbia. It was a joint program between Columbia and Haas at Berkeley. And they did a really good job of teaching it, but I already know it. So I was like, you know what, I'm out on this. And that left basically quantitative math and accounting stuff. So I just started taking those to see what was interesting. And I found out by complete accident that not only am I really good at it, I like it. But that's kind of an odd thing for me because like I've known for a while I can take like large sets of data and extract patterns out of them and usually kind of, figure things out. But I don't know what the hell to do with that. Because, banking isn't particularly exciting. But it was a lot of fun for going over stuff. But one of the classes that I took was financial statement analysis, which was essentially how do you detect fraud going on in there. And after day 3, I had to ask the professor, I was like, okay, so let me get this straight. I want to make sure I'm not crazy. The point of this class is look at the financials, listen to the conference calls on the quarterly conference calls for the SEC mandate, and then decide if you believe what they're saying. And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, why is this a week-long class? And he goes, I'm not really sure, but you're the only one in this class that's got this so far. So, it's just one of those things. But I really enjoyed it, surprisingly. But here's what I would say about MBAs. If you think you need one, you don't. That's ridiculous. If you think you might like it, you will. I actually had a really good time, and I ended up learning some very interesting sort of oddball things that I wouldn't have thought about before.
All right, so like you said, you kind of checked out on entrepreneurship because you're already doing it. What would you say for someone young listening to this who wants to be an entrepreneur? And I think that's kind of a general trend that's happening in the economy and society. What's like you've been running a business now for 15 years, the same business, which I congratulate you for. What's your 5 tips that you absolutely think someone needs to know to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah. First of all, the first piece of advice anybody ever gave me, which was absolutely vital, was so this is my 3rd company, as it turns out. The other 2 crash and burn, which is actually no problem. As it turns out, I got all my amateur mistakes out of the way on the first 2,
sure.
So we get that done. But it was told to me when I started my first company, I was still trying to run it on the side. And, of course, that's excruciatingly hard when you have a job and a side thing. I mean, a lot of people, anybody who's tried it knows how hard this is. And the problem was that, at the rate it was growing, the initial one, it was growing too slowly to the point where I was not going to be able to, basically, put this much effort and time into it to wait long enough for this thing to pop. And I was talking to a friend of mine's dad who owned a comic book store of all things. And he said what happened with him was that their comic book store was doing exactly the same when he had a full-time job. But he got fired, and it was the best thing that ever happened because his revenues went up 10x the following week when he threw himself into it. And so the thing that he told me that I think is absolutely vital is that your business will need you full-time before it will be able to support you. But if you don't jump, it'll never get there. So
that's interesting because my first business, I did the same thing. I had a full-time job and a business on the side, but my full-time job was a client of my business on the side. That's how I was kind of bridging it. And sure. I was a little cautious. I didn't make the full jump until I knew the business could support me and my employees at the same time. But I had it a little easier because I was essentially hiring my business on the side from my full-time job.
Definitely, yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, it's pretty hard, too. The other thing, too, is, especially if you think about business failure, a lot of people are scared of that. But, what really happens? So maybe you might go bankrupt personally, and that's not great. But, it doesn't matter. This is not anything that matters at all. You can't sustain significant damage by taking a shot at this. You might not succeed, and you might look like an idiot to people who told you not to do it, but that doesn't matter. You can ignore those people. They don't know what they're talking about anyway. A lot of people think that they want to, instead of being an entrepreneur, they want to, have a more secure job. Here's the thing. Your job is not secure. The minute they have a bad quarterly outcome and they lay off 20% of the force, nobody cares. They're not going to give you a loyalty bonus. They're not going to be like, oh, hey, you worked really hard for us for 10 years. We're keeping you. You'll be up against the wall like everybody else. That's not security. Nobody is secure. So you're not giving security up by jumping out. You're actually started creating your own because now you're in charge of things.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the first tip. What's next?
Yeah. Second one is, let's see. What was I'm trying to think of the stuff that happened early on that was really good. Get mentors if you can as fast as you possibly can. Find people who have already done small businesses. And it turns out more or less it doesn't matter necessarily what the small business is. Ideally, you want somebody who's actually in your field. I had an interesting time because I was not able to do this because I was running an internet business in 1999 in Kentucky. So there was really nobody to go to, and there also wasn't really any sort of general plan on like how to proceed about these things because it hadn't really been done enough at the time. So I ended up, basically sort of like fumbling around a little bit until I got lucky and ran into a friend of mine in 2006 who was able to help me out the rest of the way, just like, being a sounding board and me saying, hey, is this a good idea? Having them bounce back. So strong mentors is a must. You definitely want to go check that out.
How do you get a mentor though? Like a lot of mentors are busy because they're successful already. So how does somebody just starting out get a mentor?
So actually, it's not particularly hard depending on the person. The reason why is because for the most part, people aren't available, and you can ask them a question, and it's their option whether they can answer the question or not. But a lot of people are available for stuff like this, surprisingly. And so it's one of those deals where go to local. If you're in a smaller town, go to local business meetings where they've got, like network meetings, whatever. Find people already doing this, or even like businesses that you already are a client of. Talk to those people about it because a lot of the pitfalls about starting your own business are more or less common across industries, and so they'll have a lot of useful information for you. But it's definitely something that you can find fairly easily. But it does require asking for help, and I find that most people are terrible at that. Just do it anyway.
Okay, so tip number 3.
Tip number 3 would be always keep an eye on stuff that you don't want to look at because that's probably what's going to kill you. My first business went down because I suspected that our growth had tapered off, but I said, you know what, I'm not going to look at this. Well, you can imagine what probably happened at that point. It's very uncomfortable. You have to basically take all of these outlying things that you're like, you'd rather not have to take a look at, to take a really hard look at it and make sure that you don't actually see what you're afraid you're seeing. And my first business went down because, like I said, I took my eye off the ball. The growth tapered off, and I just decided to just sort of keep on going because it was just going to work. And then it kind of went in the ground. So it was one of those deals where it's hard. It's the hardest thing to do because nobody likes to be confronted with bad news, especially with something that is you made from the ground up. But you have to keep your eye on those things, no matter how uncomfortable it is. Okay,
that's a good one. Tip number 4.
Yeah,
I'm pushing you here.
Yeah, no problem. Quality of investors is really key. In my first company, I had a guy who got in, I had 2 investors early on that were less than optimal. One of them was that basically I started it with a friend of mine who I thought was going to work on it with me or at least equivalently. But as it turned out, he was around for the first couple of months and then that was it. And this business lasted for about 6 years. But the guy owned 20% of the company because we split it up like that from the beginning. And so one trick to do around that is something that startups have learned, which is you want to have, if you're going to give anybody equity, you want it to vest within about 4 years because that way they're still around. Unless they pay money for it. If they pay money for it, well, that's a different story. But if they don't, make sure it vests in 4 years because most of the time anything that starts with, 3 people or more, you're going to lose at least one of them and probably only be down to 2 at the end of it. And so if somebody walks off with a huge equity chunk on them, and I think that happened to Craigslist. I could be misremembering this, but if I remember right, Craigslist had a 3-way equity split with 3 founders. One of them disappeared earlier, and they just sold the whole his stake to eBay.
That's right.
Yeah, which I talked to Craig about it. Craig said it wasn't like the worst thing in the world. They're great partners, but I'm pretty sure he would have rather had that back. So the way to do that is basically make sure that everybody who you're starting the business with is locked in on a 4-year vesting period because it'll look very different by the time things are over.
That's incredibly good advice, which almost 0 people do. I think it's really important. Okay, yeah. Tip number 5. I'm really kind of making you use your brain here for this.
You got it. So actually, this one's the most important, and this is something I accidentally learned in business school, believe it or not. They didn't teach this. I picked it up because I was noticing that they kept on talking about CEOs all the time. And okay, CEOs are great, but I mean, I know like my business only functions because I have good people working for me. And so, I mean, granted, a good CEO can make a huge difference, but they're only part of the equation. And in particular, we were talking about CEOs in the context of Napoleon, who, you know, a great military leader, you know, did things really interesting. His strategy is, you know, sort of like, you know what you're getting into as much as you can, then go out there and just do it and make it up on the fly after that, for the most part. What was fascinating about Napoleon is that he had a second in command, whose name I forget, and I really should look it up because I keep telling the story. The guy basically would then take Napoleon's ideas and he would convert them into marching orders. He was essentially the COO. And what was interesting is that the minute this guy died, he died before the Moscow campaign. That was it. All of a sudden, Napoleon couldn't win a battle. And so
I didn't know that.
So it turns out that one of the things I accidentally learned, which is true, is that basically entrepreneurs actually come in pairs. There's not one, and you always need two. You need a CEO and you need a COO, and you need to figure out which one you are, and you need to go find the other person. And that's not to say you don't have any skill set overlap, but you will be strongly one or the other. And a lot of people who would make fantastic COOs are confused because they think they want to be CEO because that's a glamorous title. But it turns out unless you have a functional person that can do each job, you're going to be dead. And what's interesting is if you look at like Steve Jobs, for example, you can see the impact of this. When Steve Jobs had a good partner or a CEO, his company flourished. And when he didn't, it went downhill until he found the next one, Tim Cook, and then it popped right back up again. So basically Steve Jobs is a raving lunatic without somebody who can do the COO slot. And what's interesting is I was telling this to my friend Alexis Ohanian over at Y Combinator. He said, well, he's like, occasionally we do see one founder show up who seems to have the whole package deal. He's like, what's going on there? And I said, I will bet you anything that if you see one person, that the other person, the COO usually is the spouse. And I discovered that from talking to people who are professional artists. And it turns out that the professional artists who have made a name for themselves always have their spouse running the other side of the business.
That's probably true, actually, for my little operation. So my wife Claudia does so much for me on the business side. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and without her, I like the same thing with me. And without her, I would be completely lost and screwed up, and just some idiot who's got a funny website, as opposed to like having somebody keep me on board. But I think the trick is most people, for some reason, the COO contribution doesn't have equal weight as far as credibility. But I mean, you just cannot function without somebody who can back that up for you. And one person can't do it all. You can probably half-ass the other side of the job, but figure out which one of those two you are, find the other person.
Drew, you should probably, this is a piece of advice, and you can take it for what it's worth, but you should probably do like a podcast, because I bet it would be real interesting for even Fark, users to hear you talk about your analysis of the news, because you clearly have much more to offer in terms of analysis of the news than just kind of converting the headlines into funny headlines and listing them and so on.
Yeah, I thought about doing it for a while, but it's like I need my COO for that, basically, because I don't know how to set all that stuff up. But, I mean, I can definitely talk for hours about damn near anything, so I've got that one going for me.
All right, well, we'll talk at some point. I'll set you up completely with a podcast and figure out how you can make money on it. It'll be good.
All right, I'm up for that.
All right, well, Drew Curtis, founder of Fark.com and also author of It's Not News, It's Fark, How Mass Media Tries to Pass Off Crap as News. Thank you for coming on the show. I really enjoyed the book and the site, so I'm glad you could come on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
All right. Take care.
For more from James, check out the James Altucher Show on the Stansberry Radio Network at stansberryradio.com and get yourself on the free insiders list today.
Rehearsals for the school play were really coming along.
Bigger smile, Mr. Squirrel?
Until a custodian accidentally threw away the costumes.
Oh, no.
Everyone was rattled. Miss Garrity forgot how to play. And the Queen of the Hedgehogs almost quit.
Find a new queen.
But replacement costumes were shipped with FedEx. And with added peace of mind from picture proof of delivery, everyone could focus on the perfect opening night. FedEx, where now meets next. For residential delivery only.